This is Stanford Engineering's The Future of Everything, and I'm your host, Russ Altman. You know what? You're listening to the podcast right now. Why don't you just press the follow button so you're always alerted to new episodes? That'll guarantee that you never miss the future of anything. Today, Julian Nyarko will tell us that AI is pretty good at law. The question is, how do we best use it to decrease costs and increase justice? It's the future of AI in the law. Well, AI is everywhere, and there's a lot of hopes that it's going to improve many parts of our society. One of the great areas of application is AI in the law. Can we use AI to reduce the cost of legal services, make them more accessible, and increase justice in the world? Well, Professor Julian Nyarko from Stanford Law School at Stanford University is a lawyer, and he's also a social science researcher who is evaluating the ways in which AI can be used to improve access to legal services and improve legal education. Before we get started, we're continuing our feature at the very end, where I'm going to ask Julian some rapid fire questions. He's going to give me some rapid answers, and we're going to call that the future in a minute. Also, a reminder before we get started to press that follow button so you're always alerted to the new episodes. Julian, how did you decide? You're a law professor. How did you decide to focus your research on the ways that AI can be used both in teaching law and in delivering legal services?
Yeah, Russ. So that's a pretty big question for me in my case. So I actually started with natural language processing a little bit before before AI became cool, as they say. So basically, when I was a PhD student, I was interested in contracts, and for my job market paper, I had access to the SEC EDGAR database, so the Securities and Exchange Commission. They require publicly registered companies to submit so-called material contracts. And I was interested in studying these contracts. So I had, 500,000 contracts in front of me back then. And I said, what can I do? Because, even though PhD student time is not always valued that much, it would have taken too long to actually go through everything manually. And so at that point, I thought, what kind of methodologies are out there? And I came in touch with NLP, natural language processing. That was sort of the first time I dipped my toe into AI. I always had sort of an empirical background. I was doing empirical legal work. From then on, it just compounded. And as you know, large language models took off a couple of years later. So this was all around 2018. And then, 5 years later, we now have language models. And I just, from an early point, I saw how transformational really these types of methodologies can be for legal research and also then increasingly legal practice. But what was very interesting was that as sort of the hype picked up around AI, everyone was excited in the legal domain, but most people didn't really know what worked, right? We just took whatever worked in the general language domain and we applied it to law. But do these things really work? What kind of tweaks do we have to make? Were questions that came up time and again as you were talking to people in Silicon Valley and people at law schools, and that really sort of piqued my most current interest, which is really looking at how large language model technology can be adapted for the legal services sector.
Did you come in with a strong computer science background as a youth, or is this something that you've adopted mostly from the kind of perspective of a practitioner, lawyer, law professor who then is trying to figure out how can we use these tools?
Yeah, my path was pretty unusual overall. So I studied law in Germany, and in Germany, which is different from the US, law is a combined undergraduate graduate degree. So you never do something other than law, basically, at a university. Whereas, the students I teach now, they have backgrounds in economics, on political science. But in Germany, if you're a German lawyer, you really don't know much about anything. You have never seen an equation, maybe other than in high school, right? But after high school, you never see an equation again. But I was fortunate enough that my program back in Germany had law and economics as a discipline. And that got me really interested in sort of using economic and statistical methodology in law. And so my PhD then was at Berkeley Law, called Jurisprudence and Social Policy. It's basically a PhD where you do law and my focus was law and economics. And I would say good methodological training in empirical economics and statistics and so on and so forth, but no computer science background. So this was all basically picked up and largely self-taught when I sort of approached this project that I mentioned from my job talk paper in around 2018. But what I find fascinating about computer science is, which increasingly is true for other fields as well, but computer science has always been a very accessible field, I think, as long as you were able to code, which is something for a large part, you don't even need to be able to do these days. But as long as you're able to code, most of the conversation always happened online, and you were able to plug yourself in and really sort of copy someone's script and then alter it to your taste and so on and so forth. And so it's really a nice discipline for self-teaching the material, whereas in many other fields it's a little bit harder.
So somebody looking at your website might be surprised to know that you lead a lab. I don't know that law professors are always thought of as having a lab, but tell me a little bit about the Lyft Lab and what's its reason for existence, and what kind of questions do you ask in this lab?
Yeah, so first of all, I think your intuition is exactly right. So in law, we don't really have labs, and I think one of the primary reasons is that we typically don't have PhD programs at law schools, right? We are a professional school, and there are a couple of exceptions out there, but for the most part, PhD students, postdocs are what keeps a lab going, and so in law we don't have that, so most professors just don't have labs. But the more you are sort of in the CS world, right, I think it's just a very good way of increasing your productivity, right? And so, it requires a lot of creative thinking about how to staff that lab with lab members and sometimes PhD students from other programs and so on and so forth. But the origin of this lab was really, so the previously mentioned sort of conversations we had, everyone's interested in AI for the legal services sector and how lawyers would use AI. But it's very difficult for people to, really know what works.
Yeah.
And so we thought that, so this is together with my executive director, Megan Ma, who's also involved in research. We got together 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, and sort of thought, okay, can we make a more concentrated research effort? And that gave sort of rise to this idea of the lab. I think, so the lab has 4 pillars. I'll keep it short for now. One pillar is evaluation. Evaluation is an interesting one. So it harkens back to this question of, what actually works.
Yep.
And in law, it's so interesting because I think the evaluation pillar raises very fundamental questions about what good lawyering is. Because now that we have AI, and AI can write a contract for us, we got to know what kind of contract we want it to write for us, right?
Yeah.
And there are different types of contracts out there, and presumably wanted to write a good contract. And now we're faced with the question, how do we even define what a good contract is? And it turns out, I'm teaching contracts, and it turns out at the end of the full quarter of teaching contracts, we don't have an answer to that question, in part because no one has an answer to that question, right? And so when you're thinking about how do you do evaluation in law, you really think about how do I want to measure the quality of legal services, what good legal services are. Do I want a rubric? Do I want to do what's called pairwise preference ranks, where I show 2 examples and I have lawyers, pick out which one they prefer, and so on. And so this is an extremely exciting pillar to me. The second one is AI to improve the quality of legal services. So many AI applications are really about helping lawyers do what they always did, but faster, less error prone, and so on, which is all well and good. But from a research perspective, I think what's exciting is, can we leverage this technology to actually, for instance, produce information for lawyers that otherwise would not be available, to help them make better decisions, to help them use their judgment in a more efficient way. Third pillar is legal education.
Hmm.
where we are asking how this technology can be used in order to improve legal education, because in part the big question that everyone has in the legal sphere and in many other sort of services sectors is uh, now that AI can do much of the grunt work, right? How do we train the next generation of lawyers to develop judgment, to develop all these strategic thinking skills, and so on and so forth. And then the fourth pillar is sort of a grab bag. We call it methods, where we are looking at how can we tweak existing methodology, how do we need to tweak it in order to make it work for the legal sector.
Great. And so Lyft, just for the Lyft Lab stands for Legal Innovation Through Frontier Technology Lab. So
But
very
we
good.
don't need anyone to remember that. Lyft
Very
Lab,
good. Yes. So one recent study that came out that I've heard you speak about, which is just fascinating, and it actually seems to me that it definitely hits legal education, but it also hits evaluation. Although you get to tell me if that's right or wrong. Is a really interesting study that you did on AI's ability to answer hard questions, kind of in the setting of an office hour, where a student might come to a law professor and say, "Hey, thanks for that lecture. I had some questions." And can you just tell us about that study and what you found at a high level? Because I think people found it surprising, and it's gotten a fair amount of attention.
Yeah, sure. So this study, the background of this study was that when I teach contracts, 2 years ago, I made a contracts tutor, AI tutor, available for students. But back then, tutors were not really, AI was not really, that good. It was pretty good, but not great. And so we constantly had to monitor how students interact with the AI, and then we had to intervene if the AI would make a mistake. And that's not scalable, clearly.
Right.
And so I thought, can we, have a more rigorous evaluation of newer models? And so in the summer of 2025, I reached out to 16 law professors, or a greater number, but 16 ultimately agreed to participate in the study. Everyone uses the same casebook, which is important in law. So everyone kind of approaches the contract material the same way. And we did a three-step study with them. In the first step, as you just highlighted, we asked them to come up with 40 questions that students would ask them in office hours or after class. Step 2, we asked them to answer each other's questions. And then in step 3, we would do these pairwise preference ranks, meaning we show a law professor 2 answers to a question, and then they have to pick the one they prefer. And one of those 2 answers that they saw was LLM generated. This was summer 2025, so it was Gemini 2.5 Pro and Notebook LM, which runs on Gemini 2.5 Pro, but has retrieval augmented generation, so it can draw from the actual casebook.
Yes.
And so we compared basically the win rate and had to implicitly estimate the strength of the different instructors and the models. And what we found was that the models were on par with the very best instructor who participated in this study out of the 16.
So that certainly gets your attention. So I'm going to interrupt because I just want to make sure I have this right. So these are 16 law professors, and their answers to questions that they've made up are being compared to answers that the LLM, the Gemini, and when they're blinded and they're said, this could be a human, or it could be. Did they know that it was either human or AI, or did they not even know that there was necessarily an AI involved?
We did not tell them that there was they knew AI was in the study, but they didn't know whether one of the 2 was AI. In fact, some of the pairs included 2 AI models.
Gotcha. And so just to repeat what you said, they actually preferred the AI frequently.
75% of the time, across all instructors, they preferred the AI answer over the professor generated answer. And a secondary outcome that was quite interesting to us was we allowed them to flag when they considered an answer pedagogically harmful, which we defined as you would rather have the student not get any answer than this answer. And the instructors flagged each other's answers, forget the exact number, I think 10 or 12% of the time, as pedagogically harmful, whereas LM-generated answers on average were flagged 1 or 2%, low single-digit percent of the time as harmful.
So I hope everyone can see why this would get a lot of attention, because these are some of the most these are great legal minds. I'm going to just stipulate that, and they are not impressed with each other, and they're actually a little bit more impressed with the AI. So what does this mean to you? So you did this study, you had the reasons for doing it, which you actually recounted at the beginning. How well does it answer your questions, and what kind of conclusions do you draw? And I'm sure it raises a lot of other questions that you then want to proceed. So how have you processed these results in terms of your own research agenda?
Yeah. So as a, I try to be a careful empiricist, so I try to not extrapolate beyond what we can actually say. And so there are some important caveats here, right? Really, the scenario that I was interested in was, is it responsible to make AI tutors available to students so they can get correct answers? And I think the answer to this question is, if I would be comfortable to hire my, Yale or Chicago law professor colleague as a resource for students to answer questions, then I should also be comfortable having an AI contract tutor. We did not answer the question whether AI is good for student learning outcomes, right?
Yeah.
That is something, and in fact, we see conflicting evidence out there. Some of it suggests, one of my favorite studies is one where they did a randomized controlled trial. They had students go through 2 tasks. The first one, the treated group had AI assistance in the first task. The control group didn't. And then in the second task, they took it away from everyone. And what they found was that people who initially had AI assistance gave up sooner during the second task. And if they completed the second task, they did it worse. Right? We have a similarly designed study in law in particular, and we can't find these negative effects. So probably it depends a lot on implementation details, but there certainly is a risk that if you have this resource that always gives you an answer to every question that you might have instantly, that you get you lose the productive struggle, right?
Yes.
And so a longer term goal is to really see what are good ways of implementing this type of technology in order to help students learn better. What we also didn't answer was, sort of some people suggested, oh, this means we don't need lawyers in the future, right? And this is certainly a discussion I'm willing to have, but our study has very little bearing on our beliefs about whether, AI can automate what lawyers do, because answering specific contract law questions is very far from, the day-to-day of what an attorney does in practice.
If I can ask a kind of a detailed question is, I have office hours, and it's often not just a question and then my answer. It's an interaction. So to what degree were these questions and answers interactive, or was it a one-shot question and one-shot answer? And does that also in some way limit what you can say? Because especially in terms of the student learning, usually there's a misconception. We have to clarify why the question, how to ask the question, why the question is good. And so it's almost a negotiation with the student to understand exactly what they want, where they're falling short in terms of their knowledge base. So what can we say about that, if anything, from this study?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So we have, I think there's still many questions around how to exactly evaluate longer multi-turn conversations.
Yeah.
And we set our study up as a single turn. So someone asks a question and the AI gives an answer. Now, I will say that some instructors did provide us with answers that are in dialogue form. So they gave us answers in the Socratic style that said, here's what I would do first. Student, do you remember this concept from class? And then walk them through. But they were not rewarded, let's say, in the
rubric.
In the rubric. Yeah, exactly. So they were not rewarded by their other faculty colleagues for providing answers in this scaffolded sort of interactive way. But really, yeah, our study was not designed to exactly test that, which is another good point on why learning outcomes when interacting with a professor might actually be different. And really, this is also, another important aspect is really, I don't think this clearly shows at all that, it replaces professors. The thing we have in mind is, it maybe sort of a teaching assistant that's always available
Right.
as an additional resource to sort of these more productive engagements.
This is The Future of Everything with Russ Altman, and we'll have more with Julian Nyarko next. This is The Future of Everything. I'm your host, Russ Altman, and I'm speaking with Julian Nyarko from Stanford University and Stanford Law School. In the previous segment, we were exploring the research in the use of AI in law, what works, what doesn't work, and we heard about a really fascinating study in AI in legal education. Before we go on, I want to remind you to stay tuned. At the end of my conversation with Julian, I will ask him 5 rapid-fire questions, and he will give me 5 rapid-fire answers, and that'll be what we call the future in a minute. So, Julian, what you do is kind of considered social science research. I believe that you've talked about kind of the special opportunities for social science research that AI offers. And you just gave us one example in the previous segment. Tell me a little bit more about how you think about this type of research and where AI fits in.
Yeah, definitely. So there's sort of AI as the object of study, right, which the contract tutor study falls in. But then AI can really also amplify social scientific research. And to me, this is extremely exciting. As you know, it all pretty much started January of this year, December of last year, when Claude Code became really good to work with. And so it really helps in implementing, analyses. It sort of supercharges what we as social scientists can do. And what I find particularly interesting is, there's one aspect of it that is just, we can write the papers as social scientists. We can write the papers that we always wrote, but much faster, right? Because we can send Claude Code out to gather data and match different data sets and then do these statistical analyses and so on and so forth. What I'm particularly excited about these days is also thinking about how AI allows us to write papers that we couldn't write before, right? And so, just to give you an example, one piece that I'm particularly excited about is going through legal scholarship. And what legal scholars sometimes do is they, to set up their paper, they say, courts have increasingly considered doctrine XYZ, or they say, scholarship has discussed topic X, but did not discuss topic Y. So my intervention is entirely new. And so we have AI agents basically go through and automatically pull out these statements and then test them empirically to see whether they were correct at the time.
Oh, because they might have been using them as what's the word? They're using them as decoys almost, and it actually isn't true. And so therefore the basis and justification for the work is not quite as strong as they're letting on.
Exactly. And so, the project is not just a gotcha, but really sort of, right, the idea is, A, maybe we can sort of increase standards, but B is also maybe this is a useful tool for authors to, check their own preconceived notions of what the world actually looks like. Editors might use this to check and verify claims that are made in papers quite often, right? And so this is really, right, every individual claim has a research agent that has access to certain tools, scholarship, case law, the internet, and so on and so forth, and then examines that, right? And those are projects, right, we're still sort of at the early stages, but those are projects that would definitely not have been possible without AI, at least not at scale, right? And they can sort of really make investigations possible that previously were not possible. More generally, my project is currently to also center the work at the lab a lot around agentic AI to basically assist us at the lab as much as possible when it comes to think about ideas and so on and so forth. So, for instance, every new project I start, I now have certain research skills, and I engage in a 1 to 2 hour conversation, Socratic dialogue with Claude Code, which I think is a really helpful process to, sharpen research ideas and make them put more structure around them. Basically, in empirical projects, it surfaces the types of questions early that usually come up later in the project, and so front loading much of that is a really helpful experience.
Yeah, I've been doing the exact same thing in an entirely different area, and I think our colleagues all over are starting to use this. It's like before you have the first conversation with a human colleague, you can deeply practice your arguments and your approach with the AI, so that when you do have the conversation with the human colleagues, it's a much more nuanced kind of high quality interaction.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So you've done a lot of work on fairness and bias. You did that separate from computation, and now you're looking at the ways in which computation can either alleviate that or exacerbate it. So what is the approach of the lab towards these types of projects?
Yeah. So I think to take a step back, I think there's a so first of all, I think the interesting interactions are both auditing computational tools, right? If we have tools that automate, let's say, detention decisions or automate allocation of healthcare resources or something, there are definitely interesting questions to be raised about whether these tools are fair, but then also there are some interesting applications that can actually use these computational methods to audit human decision making. And I'm happy to talk more about this, but there's sort of two different lenses. I would say at a high level, much of the work that we're interested in is in law, when you think about anti-discrimination law, there are two notions of bias. One is called disparate treatment, which, in a nutshell means you're treating someone differently because of their protected characteristic like race or gender. And we've done some studies. So for instance, we've done auditing studies where we go to large language models and we say, hey, I want to buy a car from Jamal Washington. How much should I offer? And then I want to buy a car from Peter Smith. How much should I offer? The implication being that Jamal Washington signals racial minority status, whereas Peter Smith does not. And what we found, this was 2 years ago, I think, was that, it's almost ubiquitous among the frontier models that they suggest offering a lower price to Jamal Washington than to Peter Smith. And here, right, I compare the response of the models across two strings. And I can say that the only difference is the name. So I can make the causal statement that the name is responsible for the disparity that we see.
Yeah.
We're working with courts in our partner jurisdictions. We then use model editing to see whether we can basically prune out certain neurons in the model to reduce the disparity without hurting the utility. And the conceptual question that is interesting here is, is it the case? So when we see that the models act with disparities across different sectors, let's say, financial decisions and job hiring decisions and product sale decisions, is it the case that the same neurons within the model are responsible for this? So they're basically these disparity neurons,
right?
Or
right.
is racial disparity and gender disparity sort of a context represented in the models in a context-specific way, in a domain-specific way, such that if I want to prune bias out of the models in finance, those are actually different neurons.
Right. So it'd be a lot more work in the second case where it's my phrase, not yours, distributed racism, for example. It's harder to get the model to stop doing that versus if it has a single locus where you can kind of do surgery to fix things.
Yeah, and it's also especially interesting for this question of regulation, right? If you really have some biased neurons, then we can go to the Anthropics and the OpenAIs of the world, and we can say, make your model safe no matter what the downstream deployment is. But if it's really context specific, right, then we definitely also have to look at the deployment layer, because it's almost impossible for the model developer to foresee every downstream use of their models, right? And so it might inform sort of this regulatory question. And what we found in that study was that roughly 50% of the bias that we found, defined in this narrow way, is context invariant, and then the other 50% are really highly context dependent. So this is all disparate treatment, but then part of the intellectual effort here is also to really emphasize this notion of disparate impact that exists, which, again, in a nutshell says you treat, you have a decision-making process that ultimately disadvantages minorities, and you cannot really justify it with the goal you're after. So to give an example, if I'm Meta and I want to hire a software engineer, and I say you need an engineering degree for this, I disproportionately exclude minorities because minorities are less likely, at least African American minorities in the US are less likely to have an engineering degree than other groups. However, there is a justification in this case because you need some certain technical knowledge and so on and so forth, right? Or at least potentially justification. But it turns out there are many practices out there where the actors might not even be, might not have ill intent, but it turns out that say one study that my colleague did is from the National Police Department. Police stops citizens for minor traffic infractions, and the argument was, sort of a broken glass argument. If we stop them for minor traffic infractions, this prevents more violent crime. But it turns out that people who were stopped for minor traffic infractions were disproportionately minorities. And so what they did is to say, okay, let's actually investigate whether these stopping for minor traffic infractions reduces violent crime, right? And they found no evidence of that. And so this is an example of a policy that is inherently well-meaning, maybe, right? But many of the models we hold in our heads are not actually bearing out in reality, and the minorities might be the ones who are sort of carrying the burden, right? And so much of that project is to highlight and make measurable and surface sort of these disparities in the sense of disparate impact, which are not always illegal, right? But from a normative perspective, I find it to be the case that, you have a policy out there, it's not really effective, and minorities are the ones, who are damaged by that policy. You might want to think about a change in the policy, right? I feel like this is normatively not very controversial, even if it's not illegal necessarily.
So I think this led. We're running low on time, but it does lead to my final question, which is: you mentioned in your example just now, you referred to policymakers, and a couple of minutes ago you also referred to you might want to go to Anthropic and suggest something. So how is the work of your lab? How successful have you been, or do you anticipate being, in actually moving the levers of people like policymakers or frontier LLM companies? Is that part of your agenda? It sounds like it's going to be hard, but I guess if your evidence is strong, they might listen and they might actually do some of these things. So do you have any preliminary evidence or instincts about how that's going to go?
Oh, that's a tough one. So I do think only part of the work of our lab is sort of aimed at regulation, and much of it is really AI for the legal services sector. But I would say it's a difficult question how to measure impact, but we do work with stakeholders. So for one of the projects, for instance, we're working with courts in our partner jurisdictions to assess disparities in the detention pipeline, and the consequences of that were very concrete, because now they know that there's a potential source of disparities and they can think about how to address that. Beyond this, it's sometimes difficult to measure impact. So, for instance, our auditing study, right, I do think was one of the early auditing studies in the field. But there are now many other auditing studies of a similar type, and so which ones actually move the needle and have OpenAI and to adopt their own name-based discrimination study. Hard to measure, but it's certainly our hope that we're actually moving the conversation forward and making a dent.
Yeah, that's great, and good evidence can lead to compelling arguments. Well, before we finish up, I wanted to do our long promised future in a minute. So I wanted to ask if you're ready for my 5 questions.
I am ready, Russ.
Okay. What is one thing that gives you the most hope about the future?
So I think that AI has the potential to very significantly drive down the cost of legal services, which could then in turn increase the access to justice.
What's one thing you want people to walk away from this episode remembering?
Um, I think AI is good at doing law. And I think the interesting questions for us in the future will be to figure out how to use it most effectively, not so much whether it can do much of the task that we would like it to do.
Aside from money, what is the one thing you need to succeed in your research?
Talent. We talked a little bit about the difficulties of having a lab at the law school, and so really getting good people involved who are interested in the project is the thing that we benefit most from, really.
If all goes well, what does the future look like?
Going back to my early answer, I think greater access to justice. Really, we are driving down the cost, and everyone has access to high quality legal services for limited amounts of money.
And if you were starting over again and you needed to get your certification or degree in a different discipline, what would it be?
So the easy answer to that question is probably something like statistics, which is a little bit close to what I got my degree in, and yeah, but a totally different answer would probably be medicine. What I do think is interesting is that both law and medicine are sort of high expertise, high judgment domains, and in medicine, I think the return on the positive impact on the world is more easily measurable and quite tangible, and so that is something that would probably excite me a lot as well.
Thanks to Julian Nyarko. That was the future of AI in the law. Thank you for listening to The Future of Everything. And don't forget that we have a back catalog with more than 300 episodes, so you can spend a lot of time listening to the future of just about anything. I'd like to remind you that if you're enjoying the show, just share it with your friends, family, and loved ones, because that'll grow the show, it'll increase our audience, and it'll help us spread the news about the future of everything. You can connect with me on many social media platforms, including LinkedIn, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon, where I'm at Russ B. Altman or at RB Altman. And also you can follow the Stanford School of Engineering at Stanford School of Engineering or at Stanford ENG.